All right, let's jump right into today's deep dive. We're talking about Battalion, War of the Ancients.
Oh, this one's a classic.
It is, and we've got the rulebook right here, ready to break it all down.
Awesome. So we're talking ancient armies, right? From Romans to the Han Dynasty.
You got it. All about commanding these legendary forces
Yeah.
and, trying to outsmart your opponent.
And crush them on the battlefield.
Exactly. Now, the rulebook, it's dense. There's a lot to unpack here.
There is, but it's so well done. Like, you really get a feel for the strategic depth of ancient warfare.
Right. It's not just about brute force.
No. It's all about maneuvering, careful planning, and knowing when to unleash the right tactic.
You've got me intrigued.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. What's the core of the game? Like, how does it all work?
Well, you've got your army. And each unit, it's made up of these rank tiles, and each tile has its own, unique traits.
Oh, okay, so some units are better at certain things than others,
Exactly. Some might be super tough, like able to take a ton of hits.
and others might be fast, good for flanking maneuvers.
Exactly. And then you've got the tactic cards.
Those sound interesting. What do they do?
They add a whole other layer of strategy. You can use them for all sorts of things, like boosting your attacks, messing with your opponent's plans.
So it's not just about, rolling dice and hoping for the best.
Oh, there's definitely some dice rolling. Gotta have that element of chance.
But there's more to it.
Oh, way more. It's about knowing your units, playing the right cards at the right time, almost like you're playing a game of chess but with ancient armies.
I'm starting to see why you love this game. Now, the rule book mentions something about sectors and zones on the battlefield. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so picture the game board. It's divided into these sectors, like a real battlefield.
Right.
And within each sector, you've got different zones. You've got your engagement zone where the fighting happens, the formation zones where your units are, getting ready.
Like waiting for orders.
Yep, exactly. And then there's the reserve zone. That's where your reinforcements are, waiting to be deployed at the perfect moment.
Okay, so there's a real sense of flow, of moving your troops around, trying to outmaneuver your opponent.
That's the heart of it. You're constantly thinking, how do I get my units into the best position? How do I counter what my opponent's doing?
It sounds intense. Now, you mentioned each turn has two phases. Remind me, what are they again?
You've got the redeployment phase and the action phase.
Okay, so during redeployment, what's happening?
That's when you're moving your units around, using those tactic cards to, gain an advantage.
So it's almost like a setup phase, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're setting the stage for the action to come.
Okay, and then in the action phase, that's when things get real, I imagine.
That's when you're actually issuing commands to your units.
Ah, okay. Like telling them to attack, to defend.
Exactly. You've got different commands you can give: assault, barrage, charge. Each one's got its own, pros and cons.
So it's not just about picking the strongest unit and sending them in.
Nope. It's about choosing the right command for the situation. Do you go for a head-on attack? Do you try to outmaneuver them?
A lot of tough choices.
Always. And remember, every decision has consequences. Push a unit too hard, and they might, take too much damage. You could even lose them completely.
So there's a real risk-reward dynamic there. I'm starting to see how deep this all goes.
And we're just scratching the surface.
I believe it. Before we go any further, I'm really curious about these tactic cards. What kind of crazy things can you do with them?
Oh man, where do I even begin? Let's say, for example, you're about to launch a major attack. You could play the Banners of War card. That lowers the cost to command your units so you can, launch a multi-pronged assault.
Ooh, that sounds powerful.
It can be game-changing. Or let's say your opponent has a really strong unit that's giving you trouble.
Okay.
Boom, you play the artillery card. It lets you bombard them from afar, soften them up before you engage.
So there's a real element of surprise, like you never know what your opponent might pull out.
Exactly. That's what keeps things exciting. Every game is different because of those tactic cards.
I can see why you're so passionate about this game. So we've got the units, the different zones on the battlefield, the tactic cards. It's all starting to come together.
It is right. It's like a beautiful, intricate dance of strategy and chance.
But before we get too lost in all the possibilities, I want to zoom in on the units themselves. We've talked about how they have different traits, but what are some examples? Like, what kind of unique abilities can these units have?
Oh, there are so many cool ones. Let's say your opponent is planning to charge at you with their cavalry, right? But your unit has this special trait called fright.
Fright. That sounds intimidating.
It is. It makes charges harder to pull off, so your opponent might have to rethink their whole strategy.
It's like a psychological advantage, right, before the
Yeah.
battle even begins.
Exactly. Or let's say you've got a unit with the steadfast trait. Those guys, they're tough. They can take a ton of hits without flinching.
Like they've got nerves of steel.
Yeah, they're the anchor of your defensive line. They'll hold the line while your other units maneuver into position.
Okay, so we've got units that can disrupt charges,
Yeah.
units that are super tough. What else? What other surprises are hidden in those rank tiles?
All right, picture this. Your opponent has a unit all by itself, like they've pushed too far ahead, or maybe you've managed to isolate them.
Okay, yeah.
That's when you take advantage of the overlapping mechanic. You can gang up on that lone unit with multiple units of your own. It's like a pincer movement.
So you're basically adding more dice to your attacks, right?
All right.
Because you've got more units involved.
Exactly. It can be a devastating tactic. It simulates those historical battles where, an army gets surrounded and just overwhelmed.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it's not just about picking the strongest unit. It's about using them together strategically.
Absolutely. It's about synergy, like knowing how to combine your units to maximize their effectiveness.
I'm starting to see how much depth there is to this game, and we haven't even talked about combat yet.
We'll get there, but before we do, I want to ask you something. What kind of general do you think you'd be? Like, if you were commanding these ancient armies, what would your style be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think, I think I'd be a cautious general. Like I'd focus on defense, on holding my ground.
Yeah.
And then when the opportunity arises, I'd strike swiftly and decisively.
I like it. A master of defense, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash your fury.
Exactly. But I'd also want to be adaptable. Because on the battlefield, things can change in an instant.
Oh, absolutely. You've got to be able to think on your feet, adjust your strategy as needed.
And that's what makes this game so exciting, right?
Well,
It's
yeah.
that constant challenge of trying to outsmart your opponent.
That's the beauty of it. And we haven't even scratched the surface of combat yet.
I can't wait. But for now, we'll have to leave our listeners hanging.
Yeah, we'll pick up the action in part 2. We'll dive into those combat commands, the dice rolling, the thrill of victory.
And the agony of defeat.
Oh, of course. It's all part of the experience. So until next time, keep those strategic minds sharp.
And may your armies be victorious.
Welcome back to our deep dive. Now, last time we were talking about all sorts of things, like unit traits and tactic cards, remember?
Oh, yeah. And I'm still thinking about what kind of general I'd be.
Still strategizing, huh?
Absolutely. But, we laid off right before the real action starts, the combat. I'm ready to see how these battles actually play out.
All right, let's get into it then. So you've got your army all set up, your units in position.
Okay, I'm picturing my legions ready to clash.
Perfect. Now, let's say you want to launch an attack. You've got a unit of Roman Hastati, those classic legionaries.
Oh, yeah, those guys are tough.
They are. And you decide to go head-to-head with some Carthaginian Scutari.
Ooh, those are like the heavy infantry for the Carthaginians, right?
Exactly. This is going to be a clash of titans.
So how does it work? How do we actually resolve this epic battle?
All right, first, you've got to figure out your attack strength. Each Hastati unit has a base strength of 3 dice. So you're going to roll those.
3 dice. Okay, let's see. I got a 6, a 3, and a 2. Not bad, right?
Not bad at all.
Yeah.
Now, you got to assign those dice to your Hastati's attack values. Remember, each unit has these values that determine how hard they hit.
And I remember from the rulebook, the Hastatis have a melee attack value of 5.
That's right. So looking at your dice, you can only use that 6, which translates to 1 successful hit.
Okay, 1 hit. I was hoping for more, but I guess that's how the dice roll sometimes.
It happens. But hey, 1 hit is better than none. Now it's your opponent's turn. They get to choose how they want to take that damage.
So what are their options?
They can remove a rank from their Scutari unit that weakens their overall strength, makes them more vulnerable in the future.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Or they can accept a disorder marker. That means they keep their unit size, but they risk, becoming less effective in battle.
Tough choice. I guess it depends on their strategy.
Exactly. Let's say, for now, they decide to take the disorder marker. They're protecting their precious Scutari, at least for now.
Okay, so they've got this disorder marker. What does that actually do?
Think of it like a chip in their morale. 1 disorder marker might not seem like much, but they can add up.
And too many chips, the unit could crumble.
Exactly. It simulates the stress, the chaos of battle. The more disorder a unit accumulates, the more likely they are to, completely break down.
So even if I'm not destroying the ranks right away, I'm wearing them down mentally and tactically.
You got it. And on top of that, they also have a limited number of what are called cohesion points.
Cohesion points, what are those?
It's like a resource that represents their army's overall, cohesion. If they run out, they start facing penalties.
So it's not just about individual units. The entire army can suffer if their morale is low.
Exactly. It adds a whole other level of strategy to the game.
This is incredible. I'm seeing how every decision matters, how you have to think about the long-term consequences.
That's what makes it so engaging. It's like you're really commanding an army, weighing every move.
Now, before we get too deep into the strategy, I want to go back to the combat itself. So I hit their Scutari, they took a disorder marker. What happens next? Is the fight over?
Not quite. They get to counterattack. Even though they're on the defensive, they still get to hit back.
Ah, so it's a back-and-forth exchange, a real tug-of-war.
Exactly. And that's where things can get really interesting because the charge command comes into play.
Oh yeah, I remember that from the rulebook.
Yeah.
The charge command. Sounds aggressive.
It is. It lets you initiate combat with a unit that's not already engaged.
So you can basically surprise them, catch them off guard?
Exactly. It's a risky move, but it can pay off big time if you pull it off.
But there's got to be a catch, right? It can't be that easy.
Well, the thing is, when you charge, your unit is also exposed to counterattacks before they even get to strike.
Oh, I see. So it's a gamble. You could hit them hard, but you could also get hit back even harder.
That's the risk you take, and it gets even more complex when you factor in those unit traits.
Oh yeah, those traits, they can really change the game, can't they?
Absolutely. Imagine your opponent has a unit with the anticipate trait.
Anticipate, what does that do?
It means they get to strike first, even if your unit initiated the charge.
Wow, that's sneaky.
It is. So you really have to think carefully before you charge. You got to weigh the risks, consider your opponent's potential moves.
This is intense. So much to consider.
That's the beauty of it. It's a game of strategy, of reading your opponent, of anticipating their every move.
And of course, a little bit of luck never hurts.
Oh, definitely. The dice rolls can always throw a wrench into your plans.
Speaking of which, we've talked about the assault command and the charge command. What about barrage? What's that all about?
Barrage. That's for your ranged units, like archers, slingers, those kinds of guys.
So they attack from a distance.
Exactly. You pick your target, roll your dice, and hopefully rain down a hail of arrows or javelins.
Sounds effective.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there are downsides too.
Well, ranged attacks are usually a bit weaker than melee attacks, and of course your ranged units are pretty vulnerable if the enemy manages to close the distance.
So it's all about positioning, right?
Yeah.
Keeping your ranged units safe while they pepper the enemy.
Precisely. It's all part of the strategic puzzle.
Okay, so we've got these different combat commands, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. It's starting to feel like I'm actually commanding an army here.
That's the goal. And don't forget about those tactic cards. They can really shake things up in the middle of a battle.
Oh yeah, those cards. There's still a bit of a mystery to me.
Can you give me some examples of how they might be used in combat?
Let's say, for example, you're in a tight spot.
Yeah.
Your attack just didn't go as planned. Maybe you rolled some bad dice.
Happens to the best of us.
It does. But then, boom, you play the veteran troops card.
Veteran troops. What does that do?
It lets you re-roll one of your dice. You get a second chance, potentially turning defeat into victory.
Oh, wow. That could be a lifesaver. So you can use these cards to boost your attacks.
Absolutely. Or let's say you need to reposition your troops quickly. You could play Banners of War, like we talked about earlier. That reduces the command cost to activate a unit, so you can move them into a better position.
So you can use them for strategic maneuvering as well. Exactly. And some tactic cards are specific to each faction. So, like, the Romans might have a card that reflects their discipline formations, or the Carthaginians might have a card that lets them ambush the enemy.
Okay, so these cards aren't just generic. They add a real thematic flavor to the game.
They do. It's like you're not just playing a game, you're experiencing history.
I'm starting to see why you love this game so much. It's so much more than just rolling dice and moving pieces.
It really is. It's a game that challenges you to think strategically, to adapt to changing circumstances, to make tough decisions under pressure.
And to have fun while you're doing it.
Of course. Can't forget about the fun. But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I want to leave you with a challenge.
Oh, a challenge. I'm game.
We've talked about all these different unit traits. Fright, steadfast, anticipate. What if you could design your own unit? What kind of unique abilities would it have?
That's a great question. I'll have to think about that.
Think carefully, because in Battalion, War of the Ancients, anything is possible.
Back again for more Battalion action. And that challenge you gave me last time about designing my own unit.
Oh yeah, I'm curious.
Well, I've got something. Get ready for the Shadow Stalkers.
Shadow Stalkers. Okay, I like the sound of that already.
They're all about stealth, you know, masters of guerrilla warfare. Their main thing is ambush. They can deploy right into the engagement zone from reserves.
Wow, so they just like appear out of nowhere?
Exactly. No slow marches for these guys.
Yeah.
They're all about surprise attacks.
I can see how that would throw off an opponent,
Yeah.
especially if they're expecting, like, a traditional battle line.
Exactly. And to make them even more slippery, they've also got the evasive trait.
So they can attack and then vanish before the enemy can retaliate.
Exactly. Hit and run tactics. Perfect for harassing those slower, heavier units.
I bet they'd be a nightmare for those, like, heavily armored infantry units.
Oh yeah, turn their strength into a weakness. Because the Shadow Stalkers are all about speed and agility.
I like it. A real disruptor on the battlefield.
That's the idea. They might not win in a straight fight, but they can really mess with an opponent's plans.
Okay, I'm sold. Shadow Stalkers for the win. Now I'm dying to hear about your creation.
All right, prepare yourself for the Ironclad Colossus.
Ironclad Colossus. That sounds pretty intimidating.
That's the point. We're talking heavy infantry, but like on another level,
I'm all ears.
their defining trait is unbreakable. Imagine this. They can just ignore the first 2 hits they take.
What? So they're basically immune to damage for the first couple of attacks?
Pretty much. They're like walking tanks. Nothing phases them.
Wow. I bet that would make an opponent think twice about attacking them.
Exactly. And they don't just take a beating, they dish it out too. They've got the powerful trait,
Yeah.
so they get an extra die when they attack.
Okay, so they're tough, and they hit hard. Sounds like a winning combination.
They do have one weakness, though. They're slow. Like really slow.
Ah, I see. So it's all about positioning, right? Got to get them in the right place, because once they're there, they're practically unstoppable.
Exactly. They're more like siege towers than, swift cavalry. But in the right situation, they can be absolutely devastating.
I can see that. A well-placed ironclad colossus could just shut down an entire section of the battlefield.
Exactly. Now, I'm imagining a battle between our creations, Shadow Stalkers, versus Ironclad Colossus. Who do you think would win?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It'd be a clash of styles, for sure.
Totally. The agility and trickery of the Shadow Stalkers against the brute force of the Ironclad Colossus.
It would all come down to strategy. Could the Shadow Stalkers outmaneuver the Colossus, or would the Colossus just crush them with its sheer power?
That's the beauty of this game, right? There's no one right answer. It all depends on how you play, how you adapt to your opponent.
Absolutely. And that's why army composition is so important. Knowing which units to choose, how to combine them, how to use their strengths to cover their weaknesses.
It's like building a puzzle, but the pieces are ancient warriors.
Exactly. You need a balanced force. Some heavy hitters, some fast units, some ranged units. It all has to work together.
And that's where the historical aspect comes in, right? Because each faction has its own strengths and weaknesses based on real-world history.
Exactly. If you want to play like the Romans, you're probably going to focus on heavy infantry, those disciplined legions. But if you're more of a Carthaginian fan, you might go for cavalry and those surprise attacks.
So many options.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much depth there is to this game. We've barely scratched the surface, even after 3 parts of this deep dive.
I know, right? And that's what's so great about it. There's always more to learn, more strategies to explore, more battles to fight.
And that's what makes it so replayable. Every game is different, every challenge is unique.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why, even after all these years, Battalion, War of the Ancients is still one of my favorite games.
Mine too. It's more than just a game. It's like a time machine, a way to experience history firsthand.
It really is. It lets you step into the sandals of those ancient commanders to feel the weight of their decisions, the thrill of victory, the sting of defeat.
And most importantly, it reminds us that even though these battles happened centuries ago, the lessons we can learn from them are still relevant today.
Absolutely. Strategy, leadership, adaptability, these are timeless qualities. And Battalion, War of the Ancients, brings them to life in a way that's both engaging and thought-provoking.
Well said. So, to all our listeners out there, if you're looking for a game that challenges your mind, immerses you in history, and lets you unleash your inner general, then Battalion, War of the Ancients is definitely worth checking out.
It's a classic for a reason. So gather your armies, choose your faction, and prepare to conquer. The ancient world awaits.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, may your strategies be bold and your victories be legendary.